Between 1950 and the 1990s, several monumental world events took place. Not the least among them is you. Yes, the majority of you right here were probably born during the auspicious epoch known as the latter half of the 20th century. You lived through some low points and some high points. So has the Earth. So has the Church. You may remember when Pathfinders became a globally recognized church ministry. It was the same year that the Korean War began in 1950, and it was just a year later, 1951, when Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay summited Mount Everest. Stunning feats of human endurance for New Zealand and Nepal. And the same year, the U.S. rolled out color television. In 1955, the Vietnam War began, and a year later, 1956, the first Adventist church was established in Cyprus. Later, Dr. Roy S. Cornell opened a hospital in Benghazi, Libya. It Is Written became the first Christian TV program to be broadcast in color, and the General Conference voted for a 6-week cross-cultural missionary training program. This would become the Institute of World Missions. While the Russians were busy launching Sputnik, 1957, Malta got its first literature evangelists. Then, in 1958, the Maltese government granted a 3-month annual book-selling campaign. As Hawaii and Alaska joined the United States and Castro took over Cuba, an Adventist evangelistic center opened in Beirut. They've done everything there from Bible correspondence classes to running a physical therapy clinic. Remember the Benghazi, Libya hospital? The same year Alan Shepard became the first American in space, 17 of the hospital staff organized a church. The following year, the Berlin Wall went up. Later, when Benghazi Hospital was nationalized, nearly all Adventists would depart Libya. Pastor Joe Cruz started a radio program in 1965 where he would open every show with an amazing fact. He creatively named the broadcast Amazing Facts and followed up each nugget of trivia with a simple biblical lesson. Throughout the 1960s, religious restrictions were relaxed in Kazakhstan. Perhaps Kazakhstan, like a lot of the world, was beginning to care less about religion in general. Whatever the case, Adventists were able to form new congregations, construct church buildings, and hold public worship. While Apollo 11 astronauts strolled across the moon, the Adventist Youth World Congress met in Zurich, Switzerland. The same year, John Freeman founded Maranatha Flights International in an effort to organize short-term mission trips to lay people. 20 years later, they'd merge with Volunteers International to become Maranatha Volunteers International. In 1971, the artist Jasper Johns would be credited with starting postmodernism in art. Adventist Health Systems broke ground 2 years later and would become one of the most robust hospital systems in the U.S. In 1979, despite having no faculty or campus of their own, the Latin American Theological Seminary was established in Brazil, offering degrees throughout South America. Mark and Annie Scalzi, along with their 2 kids, became the first missionary family to operate under the newly incorporated Adventist Frontier Missions. They planted a church in the Philippines. It Is Written made history with the most massive satellite TV evangelistic series of all time. Net 95, 96, and 98 won an estimated 25 to 30,000 new converts. The once closed country of Mongolia established its first SDA church less than 20 years ago. And despite the recent decline, 1999 saw the worldwide enrollment in Adventist schools surpass 1 million students. From the 50s up through the turn of the millennium, the global Seventh-day Adventist Church said yes. We said yes to bold ideas, yes to innovative tools, yes to passionate ministries that grew our church all over the planet. We are not referring to growth in the thousands, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands. We are a church in the millions. 232 countries with 78,810 churches and 18,479,257 members. We are like sands of the desert, the stars of the night sky. We are an ocean. So where does that leave you? The biggest cities in the world have a population over 1 million. Nearly half of those cities fall within the 1040 window. 60% of Earth's humanity lives inside a rectangle between the latitude lines of 10 and 40 degrees. Out of the 3.4 billion people in the 1040 window, 1% know Jesus. Less than 1/1000% are Seventh-day Adventist. In the middle of the East North Africa region, there's one Adventist for every 65,000 people. There is one country that was evangelized as early as the 16th century. Portuguese Catholics converted huge numbers of indigenous people. But then, the natives grew weary of Portugal's growing power, their intolerance for other belief systems, and their involvement in the slave trade. Today, roughly 1% in the country's populace remains Christian, making it one of the least evangelized nations on the planet. Some suggest that consumerism and individualism are to blame. Others claim that this nation's postmodern worldview is simply at odds with Christianity. The postmodern worldview says truth is relative. A Christian who declares one God, one truth, and one way to heaven looks like a fool here. Does this description sound familiar? The statistics are for Japan, but the explanation could be true for numerous countries like Turkey, Netherlands, Sweden. And the 1040 window isn't the only place with bleak statistics. There is another country where only 7.5% of adults attend church. Over the past 20 years, church closures have risen to 6 per week. England has been called the most godless country in all of Europe. In the United States, the numbers of people who self-identify as Christians has dropped 1% every year for the last 8 years. While about 70% claim Christianity, only 37% report going to church. Meanwhile, non-Christian religions are on the rise. Additionally, from 1990 to the present, the number of Americans who call themselves atheist, agnostic, or of no religious affiliation soared from 8% to almost a quarter of the nation, 16.1% around the 2007 midpoint. In the first century church, the Apostle Paul acted as a missionary to the Gentiles. A map of his travels proves that while undoubtedly very slow, Paul covered a lot of territory throughout the Mediterranean. While Italy and Greece carry lasting Christian legacies, Paul's work was geographically centered just a bit further east. 100 years ago, 20% of Turkey's population was Christian. Today, the 20% of Christians in Turkey have been reduced to 0.2%. Paul had the disadvantage of traveling entirely by boat or on foot. We have no such excuse. At the end of 2013, there were only 109 registered members in Turkey's 2 Adventist churches. The population of Turkey is approximately 75 million, even in countries where we are the strongest. Where we brag that 1 in 10 people in that country are Adventist, that is not success. That means that 90% of the people in that country have not been reached with the 3 angels' message. Perhaps it's time to examine this challenge from a new angle. You, the living, breathing body of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, have in your DNA a rich heritage. You have adapted, you have adjusted, you have carried the mission. But our world is changing, and the majority of the world's population has poured out of rural regions into urban centers. This has created megacities with populations in the millions, and it's changed the DNA of how we fulfill our mission. Our traditional methods to reach the masses have lost efficacy. Like our pioneers, it's time that we adapt. We are not called to change our message, but our method. Ironically, the new angle we need may be a very old truth. It's not about countries, it's about people. Evangelism can be the natural byproduct of a loving relationship between 2 people. And authentic person-to-person missions can happen anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're called to the 1040 window or the door of your parents' house. Even business people and social media marketers know that the most trusted form of advertisement is word of mouth. People listen to those with whom they have a relationship. So we must build relationships and community with those outside our borders and beliefs, whether those are people of other faiths or no faith, or our very own children. We, the church, can apply this old truth in a new way. Each of the world's divisions has built aggressive strategies. Strategies like Life Hope Centers, Centers of Influence, comprehensive health initiatives, and small groups. With God's help, we can and will reach the masses in these large urban centers.